Welcome, everybody. I'm David Pearson from UC Riverside's Department of Technology Partnerships, which is led by Rosabella Ochoa. I'm honored to introduce to you today today's speaker, Shomit Ghosh, who has recently changed our world by joining our team as our first data analytics advisor. Shomit's life has been all about data. He studied computer science at UC Berkeley at the early age of 15 and still remains active as a faculty and industry fellow at Berkeley School of Engineering. He then spent nearly 20 years as a startup software entrepreneur and has been involved in 3 IPOs that I know of. There may be more. There may be more in the future. For the last 20 years, Shoma has been partner at Onset Ventures, serving on the boards of numerous portfolio companies and increasingly blogging and educating the world about the technology and ethics of the data-centric world that we're living in. He's teaching us that data strategy doesn't have to be intimidating or overwhelming. With a methodology in place and understanding examples from research in the market, you can break down data strategy into manageable pieces. And it's in his educational capacity that the Office of Technology Partnerships at UCR is pleased to offer this second of 3-part series of webinars on data analytics by Shomit. Today's talk is entitled Technology Strategy in a Hyperdimensional World. All 3 webinars are being recorded. I think Jennifer's posted the link for the first of this series. And if you have any questions about our programming or accessing the recording of Shomit's talks, please write to us at tp@ucr.edu. Shomit, thanks so much again for your commitment to our team and to UC Riverside. The floor is yours.
Thank you, David, for that very kind and generous introduction. And I'm so happy to be here and so happy to see so many friendly and familiar faces from UC Riverside. So let me pop up my slides here and we'll get rolling. So as David mentioned, what we're going to be talking about today is data strategy in this world, which is hyperdimensional with data. And importantly, how can your company compete? We get intimidated by the volumes of data that are out there, by the companies that are really good at being data practitioners. But this is a problem that we too need to solve if we're to have competitive companies ourselves. So if you see what the headlines are nowadays, big tech is getting into and disrupting every industry, whether it's Amazon in the auto industry, Google in healthcare, or Apple in financial services. Data is the weapon that is being wielded to disrupt all of these industries. And you might find yourself kind of like this, looking up at this wall of data about to be inundated and wondering, what do I do? And it can be very intimidating, and it needn't be. If you have a methodology, you can view this data in component pieces and address it very effectively with a component-based strategy. So that's what we'll talk about today. So as you face this wall of data as an academic, as an entrepreneur, as even just as a private citizen, what do you do when you stare at a wall of data? So as we talked about in the first webinar series, the first rule of multidimensional data is that everything is a data signal for everything. So you might remember that I gave an example of how even online scented candle reviews were basically a biomarker for the outbreak of COVID-19. Everything is a data signal for everything. So what you see here on the left are a collection of academic papers that show how something as simple as voice can help predict everything from post-traumatic stress to depression to neurodegenerative decline. And on the bottom left, even coronary heart disease. So coronary artery disease coming from voice signals, yes, everything is a data signal for everything. So therefore, if data is good, more data must be better, because the more data you have, the more signals you have for more things. And this is where success lies. And if you look at the big practitioners of big data, big tech, Google, Amazon, Facebook, etc., they're in the business of accreting ever more data every instant. So bear this in mind. Every data signal for everything. Ergo, if data is good, more data must be better. So here you are thinking, oh my gosh, but how can I demystify this methodology for data? And actually, it's relatively straightforward. Uh, let's consider it as 3 dimensions of data. And this is really how do you get your hands on multidimensional data so that you can be competitive in this multidimensional, hyperdimensional data world. And there are really 3 dimensions to this. There's the proprietary data. This is the data that you generate yourself. This is a must-have. Without proprietary data, you have nothing that's defensible. So you must have this. This is your number 1 asset, and you must grow this constantly. So that's one dimension. The next dimension is partner data, semi-proprietary. And it's semi-proprietary because you may have access to it and your competitor may not, because you have a partnership. So I have a startup, I have my own proprietary data, I partner with David's company, and I'm also sharing his data, the semi-proprietary data. Now, if Scott tries to compete with me, he's at a disadvantage because I have the advantage of my partner data, the semi-proprietary one. Because Scott doesn't have that partnership in place. So this is the second tier. The third is the public data. Most sources available, tens of millions of data sources out there, generally accessible over API, generally accessible at 0 cost. You need all 3 of these. You cannot compete with just the proprietary data. You'll be outcompeted by definition by people who also are leveraging partner data and public data. So you need all 3 of these. And always remember, if data is good, more data is better. So you need to have an insatiable appetite for data. You never stop. So that's how you get the volume of data. Once you have it, once again, you're thinking, here I am, what do I do? You're like this poor backhoe operator here trying to get the cargo ship unstuck. There are actually also 3 dimensions of method. This is what do you do with the data once you have it. At its simplest, you can query it to understand what has happened. So what's already happened in the past, what can that tell you? This is where databases come in. You also need to correlate it. So this is where machine learning comes in. Correlate the data you have to predict what's going to happen. And we'll talk shortly about why prediction is so important. And thirdly, you can actually drive things to happen using behavioral economics. So if you can see, if you can combine the 3 of these, how powerful you'll be if this is the way that you're leveraging the data. And if you look carefully at companies like Amazon or Google, you'll see that they do all 3. They don't stop with just one. So it's very critical and crucial that you too do all 3. All of them are necessary. Some definitions here as we go forward. So remember this foundational quote, if data is good, more data is better. Truly, that is truth. So if data is good, more data is better. So what this means is that if you have n data sources today, when you wake up tomorrow, you need to have n plus 1. When you wake up the day after that, you must have n plus 1 again. You're always increasing the dimensions of the data that you have. And you need to do this basically forever. So n is going to go to infinity. If you look at companies like Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, they're constantly accreting the dimensions of their data. They don't stop. They may have the highest dimensions of data on the planet, but that doesn't satisfy them. If they have n equals something today, they're going to have n plus 1 tomorrow. This needs to be you too. So what this implies is that data richness, which is your proprietary data sources that you have, the stuff that you're generating natively, you never stop. N needs to go to infinity. So if Tom's company has 17 dimensions of data today that he's natively producing, tomorrow when he wakes up, he's going to go storming into the VP of Engineering's office and say, hey, we need 18 today. Saturday, he storms into the VP of Engineering's office once again, said, we need 19 today. You never stop. Again, this is exactly what Google and Amazon do. So data richness, these are your own native sources, always asymptotically approaching infinity. You also need to have data hungriness. This is ingesting data from outside sources. Here too, you can never be satisfied. If you have 15 data sources from outside today, tomorrow you need to have 16, the day after you need to have 17. You always need to increment this. Again, this is what companies like Google and Amazon practice. They are not satisfied with their current value of n will always go up. So for you to compete, you too must always increment the value of n. So here's the data strategy in a nutshell broken down. So first question you're going to ask yourself is, what are my n plus 1 proprietary sources? What is the data that I'm producing that no one else has access to? And the simplest things can be these proprietary sources. For example, it's been shown in the academic literature that the timestamp of when you apply for a bank loan actually relates to your loan risk. So even for the simple act of collecting an online loan application, you have a proprietary data source. Everything is a data source. Everything is a signal for everything. And here you can see timestamp of when you apply for a loan will relate to my ability to repay that loan. So everybody has proprietary data. Think about what that is. And also remember that you will always be incrementing this. You will never be satisfied with your value of N. But that's most important. Without proprietary data, you do not have a business. Second most important is the semi-proprietary. So think about who your partners might be. Constantly increment the number of partners, constantly increment the number of dimensions of data you get from each partner. This is what helps you compete and outcompete people who might have the designs on your business. And finally, there are no end of free sources, easiest to get, but think about what free sources help inform your business. And we'll go through a concrete example or two here coming up. So this is it. When you think about data, it's not just one massive wall of data. There are components to it. These are the three components. Think about these three components. Think about what each of them mean to you. Think about how you constantly increment the value of N in each instance. So demystifying data strategy, once again, business models. The most important thing when you're crafting a data strategy is to understand the market opportunity in the business model. This is what helps you define what data you need. And of course, proprietary sources are essential, but always start with the business model. Always start with the business model, then figure out what data you need. Too often people say, hey, I have this data. What can I do with it? This is the wrong way to do it. So don't do this. Don't fall into this trap. It's a very common misstep. A lot of large companies, legacy companies, get caught in this trap because they do have large base of data, but unfortunately, that may not address a meaningful business problem for them. So start with the business model. And I think also that there's no, just as in real life, there's no real value, or there's limited value in being a commodity broker of anything. I think there's little value in just being a commodity data broker. You must be interpreting the data in the manners that we talked about a few slides ago.
Show me, can you elaborate a little bit more about what a commodity data broker is? Is it really like a pass-through, or what do you mean?
Yeah, exactly, just that. So it might be that I'm creating data and I'm accreting data, but I'm not actually doing anything with it other than selling it to someone else. So I think there's diminishing value in just being a commodity broker in anything, and data included. So if I have data, I really should be using it to leverage it in the ways that we talked about, which is to, for example, predict what's going to happen. Use it once again, combined with data, with behavioral economics, to drive what's going to happen. So to actually drive a business result for myself that's based on those sorts of actions. So you can look at this slide in a little bit more detail, probably on the online recording. So I won't go through this because it might take a little time to go through it. But this is the flow of data through the system. And you'll see all the things that we've been talking about, the data richness of your own native data, that you're always increasing the dimensionality of, the data hungriness through partnerships and public sources up in the top left, and using all of this to drive a prediction engine, machine learning to predict actions, and importantly also to drive actions. And then even funneling the data that you get from this back into your proprietary data stream. So you can look at that at your leisure. We'll just jump into talking a little bit about the data richness, the N+1 model. So think about when Facebook added the like button. What was the like button? They added a piece of dimensionality to their application. Yeah. Think about when Amazon bought Whole Foods. I maintain that the reason that Amazon bought Whole Foods was not to buy a grocery chain, but to buy all the data signals of physical commerce. Amazon already has all the signals for online commerce. What they were lacking was a signal for physical commerce. What's a great way to increase the dimensionality of the commerce in general data signal for Amazon? Why not buy a grocery chain? And then you think about Google, which started life as a search engine, right? But they constantly expanded the number of data signals, the dimensionality of the data forever. So they went from search to email to maps, self-driving cars. They spent billions of dollars buying companies like Nest and Fitbit. And here's the company that probably has the most dimensions of data on the planet. Of any company out there, they probably have the most dimensions. And yet, is their appetite ever sated? No. They will continue to buy companies. They'll continue to also natively add dimensionality to their own data, because they realize if data is good, more data is better. So you need to have this infinite appetite for ever more dimensions. Certainly there are implications here on what your data architecture looks like. It always needs to be extensible so you can add all of this data to your system. And of course, the higher the dimensionality of your data, the more defensible your business. In fact, the higher fidelity of the predictions that you can make. So data richness, and when we think of product roadmaps, we think of software functionality. Data richness, always adding this dimensionality, also needs to be part of your product roadmap. So when you're talking to your technology team, it's not just enough to have a software architecture, you also need to have this data strategy built in. Let's talk about data hungriness. Think about what's defined human society. We have, ever since we stopped being cavemen and individual tribes, we've been combining with others who are like-minded, non-competing, to build protection for ourselves against competing interests, right? This has always been the case in human society. Every company needs to do the same. And what this means is that think about who your non-competing interested parties are. So maybe I'm in the insurance business and Rosabelle is in the grocery business. These are non-competing interests. Maybe we can have a data partnership in place. So find those data partnerships. Think about the data sources that will complement your business, make those partnerships, build those semi-proprietary data streams to help you build defensibility. And of course, this too implies an extensible data model. It's not enough to have a fixed and rigid data model because you will always be adding these additional dimensions from outside sources. And importantly, all of us, doesn't matter what business we think we're in, and we talked about this at the previous webinar session, but all of us are in the data business. So you're not in the banking business, the beer business, logistic business. We're all in the data business. It just happens to be that banking, beer, or logistics is the front end and the ultimate destination of the data. But we're about making sense of the data. So you want to have as much data as possible. And once again, N+1, you increase this every day. So it's part of your business strategy to identify who these complementary data partners might be, your strategic partners. And if they're not a direct competitor, partner with them. If data is good, more data is better. Everything is a data signal for everything. So if scented candle reviews can tell us about COVID-19 outbreaks, I mean, who knows what these additional data sources might tell you about your own business. And by default, I believe that the large data monopolies today are and will be your direct competitors, if not today, then in the future. So I would say exercise caution when partnering with any of the big data monopolies. And once again, data hungriness, that is bringing in the data from these outside sources, is also part of your product roadmap. It's not enough just to have a software architecture as part of your product roadmap. The ability to ingest outside data also must be. Data hungriness can also be leveraged through free data. There's like no end of free data that's out there, like literally no end. Leverage it intelligently. There are things that will make sense for my business, things that won't make sense. Work on the stuff that makes sense. Don't worry about the stuff that doesn't make sense. Be a little bit discerning here. And lots of sources and websites that will get you to these free sources of data. Here's a favorite, which is Google published a year ago a directory of 25 million free data sets that are out there. And this is great that Google did this, because not only does this make life easy for us, but think about this from a Google standpoint. They have 25 million free data sets that they publish that are accessible in the public. They don't know which ones have value and don't have value. If you're hosting this search engine, don't we tell them what all the valuable ones are? Yeah, everything is a data signal for everything. Google understands that really well. So not only have they done a public service here, but they've also increased their own intelligence behind the scenes. How about a concrete example, you ask, right? So let's pretend we're in the ride-sharing business. And in the ride-sharing business, it's not a one-size-fits-all price as it is in the taxi business, right? It's about predicting how much money, and I've picked a date here, Wednesday, September 15th. This is 3 weeks out. Would I have to pay to take a ride share from San Jose International Airport to home? And I picked San Jose International Airport because it's literally across the street from the soccer stadium where the San Jose Earthquakes play. And wouldn't you know it, but there's a soccer game Wednesday night, September 15th. All right. So what is the price that I will pay for a car to take me from the airport to home? And it turns out that this is a combination predicting that price, so predicting the optimal price, not a one-size-fits-all price, but the price that's optimal for me is a function of proprietary data, partner data, and public data, and you get a very high fidelity prediction. And what we just talked about was a combination of proprietary, partner, and public, right, for your data strategy. The proprietary data comes from the rideshare app. So it's on the cell phones of the riders, on the cell phones of the drivers. There's a very rich set of proprietary information there that says things about what's the price elasticity of what I'm willing to pay, what's the price elasticity of what the driver is willing to take, how far is the driver into a shift, all those things, which is a proprietary data stream. You can combine that with partner data. So let's say my rideshare company, we partner with FlightAware because I don't want to be standing at the airport to figure out when a flight is delayed on time, how many people got off. I don't want to do that. FlightAware will get that to me. Similarly, GasBuddy will tell me on a very localized base in real time how much gas costs. So here's some partner data that I can leverage to figure out Shomit's payment and also the driver's payment. Combine that with public data. So will it be raining? Will it be hot? I can get this kind of information for free off the National Weather Service. And by doing so, I can figure out, because if it's raining, it's not very likely I'm going to walk to the train station to take the train to get home. I want to take a ride share home. I can also scrape the public internet and find out, oh, there's an Earthquakes game that night. Who are they playing? How much did that contest draw on a weeknight a year ago when the Earthquakes played that particular opponent? What time will the game finish? All available for free off the public internet. I can even get historical traffic patterns for free off the internet. So the combination of these three things allows me to predict exactly what Shomit's going to pay for the rideshare. So, and this is the sort of strategy that you want to have. Think about what's your proprietary stream, what's your partner stream, who would those partners be, what are the public sources that you can leverage, and this is multidimensionality. So, what you see here is that the value of these extended prediction horizons, right? So here we just predicted what Shomit's going to pay 3 weeks out on a Wednesday night, and that helps me say, so where should I be sending drivers to that night? Where's my greatest source of revenue? And the longer the prediction horizon, the greater the value, and of course, the higher the dimensionality of your data, as we saw on the previous slide, the further out you can make this prediction horizon. And you can see this in multiple industries. So let's say I owned a bushel of wheat, and here it is, August 26th. Should I sell my bushel of wheat or not? And I'll make the hard decision. Am I going to make money or lose money? How much money might I make? How much money might I lose based on the price I paid for that bushel of wheat? And I'll make a decision, and that's it. What if I knew that the price of wheat was going to go up a month from now? So although I might own a bushel of wheat, I'll say, hey, it's going to go up in a month. I'm going to buy more bushels of wheat because I'll sell it a month from now. I'll make a killing. What if I could predict the price of wheat a year from now? That tells me something even more strategic. Should I be planting wheat or should I be planting corn? So here you see prediction horizons and the value of the prediction horizons. And these prediction horizons, the more the dimensionality you have, the longer and the higher fidelity your prediction horizons can be. And of course, we know this time is equal to value. So we're going to wrap up here talking really quickly about the last method of data strategy we talked about, which was behavioral economics, which is how do you drive people to do what you need to do to drive your own bottom line. And behavioral economics has gotten multiple Nobel Prizes in economics here in the past 20 years. Daniel Kahneman, among the famous economists who've won it. And you think about machine learning, which is also one of the aspects of data strategy, one of those methodologies. And machine learning predicts what's going to happen. You can curve fit to predict what's going to happen. What's even better than predicting what's going to happen? It's making things happen using behavioral economics. And I'll give a simple example here is, if we want to start a coffee company, could we compete with Starbucks just by selling better tasting coffee that costs less money? Would that do it for us? So probably not. And I have here an actual screenshot from my Starbucks application. And if you look at it carefully, there are push my buttons, right, left, and center using data-driven behavioral economics. Everything, literally everything on the Starbucks app screen is behavioral economics. So here we have the, only 4 days remaining to collect 125 bonus stars. I better get in there soon. Note this, here I'm accreting some points. Here's the spacing between 25 and 50 points. Here's the spacing between 200 and 400 points. Huh, how about that? Oh, the progress bar. This is something that even you'll see on your Uber screen. How far away is that car that's supposed to come pick me up? Gamification. You know, I'm a Gold Star member, as it says right there. All of these are behavioral economics methods. So Starbucks at the top right, you'll see they use nudges through the app and also through email, which is a very well-known behavioral economics technique. And they use all these other techniques as well to push my buttons to get me to go in there and buy my coffee. More importantly, to even have money deposited on my Starbucks app. Check out the headline here. Starbucks has more customer money on card than many banks have in deposits. So imagine being a quote unquote coffee company, but actually you're a bank that doesn't have to pay interest to its depositors. And you can even take loans from that money and not have to pay interest because it's your own private bank. Wow. Yes. So this is data-driven behavioral economics. How can you use behavioral economics to drive the behavior that's important to your business? Uber by this does this quite well for both drivers and passengers, but they've really honed the practice for drivers, behavioral economics. So it's very broadly applicable. So you know, behavioral economics is a way of, through using zero subsidies, achieving the results that you want. And it can be used for a lot of beneficial uses too, as you can see here, everything from, you know, improving consumer behavior on energy to even healthcare. So the uses of behavioral economics needn't be solely about making money. You can also achieve a lot of beneficial results from it. And what behavioral economics gives you is maybe the highest quality of proprietary data, because you may have, you know, existing data about somebody, but it's commodity data. What's Shomit's gender, age, education? You can kind of figure that stuff out. But what pushes Shomit's buttons? What's his psychographic, right? There's no psychographic data that's here. But by using behavioral economics, you can actually apply tests to people. What is it that pushes this individual's button? Can we classify that? Based on that, what further tests can we give them? So we can classify that, which gives us this really key thing back, which is psychographic information. A proprietary data stream no one else has. So embedding this behavioral economics technique into your data stream, your data collection, requires, you know, conducting some of these tests that can help classify people, but it may give you the highest quality proprietary information that you can imagine. Don't lose sight of that. So again, this is the picture. You can take a look at that again. And the things we talked about, hopefully have helped illuminate some of the pieces here. And yeah, this is the multidimensional data. It's the foundation of your data-driven business model. And again, break it down into the component pieces as we've talked about here, and you'll see that it's a very tractable problem to solve. And if you do so really well, not only will you be able to outcompete fellow startups, but you'll also be able to stand toe-to-toe with some of those data giants that are out there. Next webinar coming up in about a month, we'll talk about the 5 dimensions of data ethics and the importance of data ethics today for building a sustainable business. And a sustainable business means one that will sustain itself through multiple years of operation. So we'll talk about that. And I think that data ethics is the ultimate differentiator for any startup today and really needs to be a foundational piece of your data strategy. And with that, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Shomit. Excellent new set of insights for us. A couple of things strike me. I wanted to ask the first question: who does the mathematical modeling? So let's say you're a startup and you're Thomas Tsai and you're trying to pull together some meaning to your 100 dimensions of data. How do you actually, or who do you turn to do it? Do you need to have a data scientist on the team, or is this something that's readily outsourceable?
Yeah, I think the reality is that you need to have somebody who's machine learning knowledgeable on your team. And this is pretty indispensable. You need somebody who can help correlate this and help you do these predictions. But I think the most important thing here, which the point that I want to make, is that having the right perspective on how you deal with data is the most important thing. Finding the machine learning people is next in importance, right? The key thing is having the right philosophy. So for Tom to say, hey, I understand this, I'm going to have proprietary data. I'm going to find someone who will work with me on business development, who will find partner data, and I'm going to detail some of my technology team to actually assess the different sources of public data to see which things might be relevant to us. So the most important thing that'll help Tom be successful and competitive is to just have that strategic perspective. The next step down will be saying, yeah, okay, we're getting all of this data. Now we need to have a machine learning expert here who can build the models to help us classify this stuff. But that's next importance. The most important thing is that Tom realizes that he's a multidimensional business, and multidimensional data business, and he understands what these different tiers of data are.
So if I could maybe follow up with that. So one of the things that is interesting is we are actually collecting psychographic data in terms of MindTap, right? So, if I had the foresight, right, into understanding what data we anticipate needing in the future, then I could take, Shomit, as you put it, a strategic business model approach. The other approach that I think your talk hints at is this kind of flexible approach, right? And actually in academia, we frown upon that approach, which is, we call it the fishing expedition, right? But a lot of times, I think that's where a lot of the insights come from, is the ability to remain flexible and collect those types of data. Could you maybe share a little bit about, yes, one, having a strategic vision and anticipating data down the line that you'll need, but then there also seems to be this need, or maybe an approach of flexible, where you leverage serendipity, right? Like maybe I find on the data set search a data set I need. So how do you marry that type of very logical step with the flexibility?
I think it's the flexibility and having the open mind, which is most key. So in the last talk I gave, I cited the example of the academic from Harvard who had the insight of one of the symptoms of COVID-19 is loss of smell. I wonder if I can correlate that. And of course, she found that there was a correlation between reviews for scented candles left online and the outbreak of COVID-19. So she had that insight. So I mentioned how timestamp relates to loan risk. And that was discovered by, hey, everything is a data signal. So even something as trivial as when Shomit logged into this financial website, we're going to record the timestamp and see if that correlates. And the reason why they ended up correlating, and this is you're the psychologist here, so you'll be able to interpret this, but here's how I interpret why timestamp works. And what they found was that if you apply for a loan at 9 a.m., you're a less worthy loan recipient than if you apply at noon. And if you think about, well, why might they be? It's because I think it's a proxy for your integrity. If the first thing I do at 9 a.m. in the morning when I get into the office to apply for a personal loan, I'm telling you that I don't have high integrity. I'm using my employer's time to apply for a personal loan versus if I wait for the lunch hour. So because some of these fintechs were, hey, we'll record everything. Everything is a data signal for everything, right? That's how they view it. So let's record everything and let's see if it correlates. If it correlates, voila, we have a proprietary insight and we have a multidimensional data point that our competitors do not. But if you don't have this mindset of everything is a data signal for everything, you're gonna say, no, hey, David, just record the credit score and the income and the loan amount, and we're gonna make a decision off that. Well, that stuff is necessary, but if you have, the higher the dimensionality, the better your prediction models become. So, as the CEO, as the entrepreneur, always drive home this message is, and this isn't literally true, but people need to kind of internalize this as there's no such thing as bad data. Bad data has to prove to us it's bad data. Yeah, ocean temperature in Argentina is not going to relate to my loan risk, so that would be bad data. But don't dismiss something if you think that, there might be something there, as with this example. So, and this is also why, basically, you always have access to proprietary data, always. Does that answer your question, Tom?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, part of it is strategic intent of, as you said, always be hungry and searching for data. I was also wondering, have you seen with startups such as ours, are there certain practices that either limit your ability to remain flexible with data, or I'm just thinking like something as simple as just the architecture of your database design, right? That could
Right.
potentially cap you in some way.
Right.
So what other practices do you think are relevant?
Yeah, good question. I think this is just the philosophical appreciation of we're a data company. Again, in my mind, and I think this is literally true, there's no such thing as a XYZ company any longer. XYZ is just how your data manifests. We're all data companies today. So if your team understands and internalizes that, that's 90% of the battle. And then there are implications technologically there, because then your VP of engineering will shake her head and say, yeah, what that means is, oh yeah, we will always be increasing the dimensionality with data. So let's not have a fixed schema in our database. And how do we also, because people will be partnering with us because we're going to get their data, they're going to be taking our data perhaps. So how do we have our data in a form where it can be easily extruded into the data sources of our partners? And all of these realizations will manifest practically if the team realizes we're a data company. And just also driving home the point that we're an N+1 data company. N never stops. N will always be incremented, both from our native sources and from our external sources.
Thanks, Omid.
Sumit, hi, just a comment. If companies are very successful at driving the behavior of their customers, their data set, they become obsolete very quickly. So I'm speaking a little bit about Thomas' flexibility that any startup should have, because you may buy a very nice data set. And the fact that Google has so much data as public data is because probably this data is not very illuminating anymore. Because if they are successful at driving their behavior, buying more of a given thing, you are influencing the behavior of people, and these new people is different from the old people that you have in your database. So one more reason to have this flexibility that Thomas spoke about, and I think what we are witnessing is that data becomes obsolete very quickly in this time and age.
Yeah, exactly. It's a great comment, Gloria. Exactly. And this also comes back to the need for flexibility, as both you and Thomas point out, because things will evolve. Nothing will stay static. And you need to be open to find out, what's still relevant today and what's no longer relevant today.
So I want to build on what David asked, and also some of the comments from Thomas and Gloria, and that now is more towards capability that we need to have on campus to support our entrepreneurs. Because what Shomit is saying, we are now we need to build more data-driven companies, right? So what means that if we are working on training entrepreneurially minded students and faculty, they need to integrate that mentality from the get-go. So Thomas and Gloria, your faculty, do we have the capabilities on campus, or how do we tap in that capability for more of this machine learning talent, the data science, and the behavioral economics? So it's almost like become a resource for multiple entrepreneurs that may not be thinking in those ways, but they need to tap on that expertise, and that may not be in their critical path.
I agree, Rosibel. I think the campus has resources that probably they are untapped, and they should be more public resources. I mean, computer science department is a huge asset to what we are discussing today. And my own department, I'm not a behavioral economist, but I read about it. I think I could guide people on behavior. So yeah, that should be something to advertise and to request the advice of so much human capital that we have in our campus. Why not? I agree with you, totally.
Yeah, and in psychology as well, right? Because someone like this,
yes.
red team of experts that that almost provide that insight and perspective to not just one company, but multiple companies that are going through
Yeah.
our program.
Yeah. The Nobel Prize that Summit mentioned, Kahneman, is a psychologist, even though he got the prize in economics. So yes, psychology is really instrumental to what we are discussing here.
Yeah, and just as an aside, I had coffee with a faculty member from a local university earlier in the week, and he's been doing innovation assessments for legacy companies, for large companies. And those how innovative is my company, and the metrics that are being used to judge that. And this gets back to the whole philosophy here of data. The metrics being used to judge that is how many of your engineers got trained on Python in the past year, and how many of your managers got the entrepreneurship certificate from University XYZ. And is that a measure of how innovative your company will be? No. How innovative your company will be realizing that my legacy company is a data company. So let's just throw out all consideration of the end products that we think we sell, because those end products are just a data stream back into the data company that we are. And that's what will make that legacy company innovative, not this measure of how many people got an entrepreneurship certificate and how many people got Python programming training.
So I have a couple of questions from a few startups that we mentor that are going to watch this later. And the first question is, one of the startups pitched to investor, and they're pitching themselves as an AI company, which we've had some back and forth about. When they were asked, they were asked by the investor, tell me about your data sources. The founders basically only talked about the data in their app. And the investors then gave me the feedback after the meeting. They have no interest in this startup. And I tried to communicate that to the founders, and the founders didn't understand why. And I obviously, going through your deck, they would understand it. But I don't know if you want to, since you're also a VC in the Bay Area, if you have any thoughts that we can communicate to that team.
Yeah, I think it's the feedback does not surprise me, because only having your own proprietary data is not enough. Right. And again, look no further than Google, Amazon, Facebook, Uber, all of whom are ingesting public sources and are partnering. So by only talking about your proprietary sources, you're basically showing that you're not sophisticated enough to understand the full landscape. Right. And who wants to invest in a set of founders who don't have that sophistication? And which in reality, in the startup world, it's a bloody market out there. You need to have sophisticated entrepreneurs. So I think if entrepreneurs can understand this message of the importance of multidimensional data, the importance of these multidimensional methods, query, correlate, and drive. And this is what we do. We query, we correlate, we drive. So we do all three of those dimensions. And we have a very rich strategy on increasing the dimensionality of our proprietary data and also the outside data from partnerships and public sources. I think that's what investors want to hear. And this is what the company of the future looks like.
Any other, I don't want to take all the time for questions if other founders have questions, but I have more from other founders that aren't on the call. So does anyone else, any other founders or startups on the call have any other questions? Okay, I'll ask one more then. So another thing that's been happening in some of the pitches that our startups that we mentor have been doing is that if it's a solo pitch by the CEO and they don't have their CTO with them, they are struggling when it comes to all of these, especially when there are, many, as you probably know, many pitch decks that we get these days have AI or big data as a component. And so one thing that we've been recommending is that the CTO, or if it's a founder CTO, they basically write a one pager on basically on AI and machine learning and their startup. And I don't know if that's something that you think is a good idea, or is that a waste of time? Because I just think that some of the CEOs we mentor have to do a better job of being able to communicate those various aspects in terms of AI and machine learning and big data, and they're not doing a good job in front of investors. At least that's the feedback I get after the meetings that I'm not in from the investors themselves. Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Scott. I think because AI and machine learning, they're such buzzwords du jour, and everyone thinks, hey, to get funded, I need to look like an AI company. Everyone comes in and says they're an AI company.
right? So, okay, well, what does that mean? And the CEO or the person presenting needs to be able to say something other than, oh, we use machine learning. Well, big deal. So this is why I think the number one thing that the CEO has to articulate, what is the business model? So what is it, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And why is, for example, prediction important in that space? If you think about human beings, human intelligence, what do we do which might set us apart from other sentient life forms here on the planet? We can predict. You know, my pet cat can't predict what's going to happen and is probably not thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow, right? We all do think about that. So you think about AI also needs to predict. It's, I think, of limited value to know what has happened. It's way more valuable to know what's going to happen. So the CEO standing up and saying, here's the business we're addressing, here's our business model, completely predicated on being able to predict the onset of X, whatever X might be. It could be a healthcare condition, it could be, you know, buying and selling bushels of wheat, but here's how we're going to predict it. And our prediction is going to have a really long prediction horizon, and it's going to be very highly, have very high fidelity because our dimensionality of n is very high. So we can predict at a very long horizon, and we can predict with very high fidelity because the dimensionality of our data is so high. That's what they want to say. I think the investor doesn't want to just hear AI as a buzzword, and they also don't want to hear, well, we looked at support vector machines and we looked at random forest with backpropagation, and we decided to go the backpropagation route with random forest because the classification problem was right for the kind of data that we're using. They don't want to hear that, right? That kind of technology discussion might be fodder for a later discussion, but not when you're pitching. When you're pitching, what is the business model? What are you predicting? What's the dimensionality of your data? Those are the things that people will care about.
That's great. Thanks. So any other questions from any of the other founders on the call? I guess not.
I think people are lost in their own multidimensionality in their brain right now.
That's right.
Thank you
Yeah.
for your
If I could jump in, if no one else has a question. Shomit, one of the recent developments in MindTap, or the startup I have, I'm now partnering with a couple of academics from UC Irvine and UC Davis. And the idea there is we would take MindTap, which is what they would describe as an open system, meaning just like Calm or Headspace, right? They're open systems, meaning there's no 360 closed loop feedback system. So the advancement here would suggest that with a closed loop system, what you're able to do is you're collecting data on similar to your Starbucks, right? They can see your behavior, and now they can take that behavior and make future nudges to shape your behavior. So within our current logic is that because we're now collecting data from the participant, so this idea of, I'll just call it personalized data, right? So versus host scale data, for lack of a better term. I'm not the best at this, but host scale data being we can predict things about an entire population. And this is where maybe free data sets will be amenable here. But if we're just predicting the behavior of a single individual, and please correct me if I'm incorrect, if we're just predicting about a single individual, then that's where maybe just having a closed loop system of proprietary data may be relevant. Now, the flip side, from what I've learned from your conversation today, say, no, Tom, that's not enough, right? What you also need is free data, such as maybe there's something about the location that your participants are engaging in this behavior. That free data on location may also be predictive. So what I'm taking from you today is even if you're doing a individualized closed loop personal prediction, public sources or free data is either almost mandatory from a VC perspective or definitely helpful. Is that the right framing or philosophy?
Yeah, absolutely. Great comments there, Tom. Yeah, think about here the Starbucks example. Let's say, and today it's supposed to be like 100 degrees here. It's 3 o'clock and it's 100 degrees. Does Starbucks want to push me an iced drink or a hot drink? Oh, public data based on where I am. It's going to be 100 degrees, iced drink. And back in the days when I said go into the office pre-COVID, usually I'd get to the office around 8 a.m. and there's a Starbucks right by my office. I would have, a very informal business meeting with somebody over coffee on Thursday mornings at 8 a.m. More often than not. And guess when Starbucks would nudge me for coffee? 7:40 every Thursday morning, I got nudged for coffee because they'd figured out this was the personalized thing. Don't bother nudging me at 3:40 p.m. Nudge me at 7:40 p.m. Excuse me, a.m. Right? So they had that down personalized. When should they nudge me? And they can combine this now with the broader data as you just talked about, Tom. And were I going for coffee at 3 p.m., should they be pushing me a cold drink or a hot drink? Because if they push me a hot drink, I think, oh my gosh, I'm sweating like a pig over here. I'm not going to go get a hot coffee. And I don't take the offer. Whereas if they, oh, look, iced coffee or lemonade, whatever, that sounds really great. Let me just drop by there.
So one other thing I wanted to just mention, doesn't apply to any of the startups that are on this particular call right now, but for startups that are going to watch this after, we have a tremendous amount of talent that is here in the region, and also that is at the various universities, including UCR and Cal State San Bernardino. And a number of the startups are 1 or 2 man or woman shops. And what I would encourage all the founders, a number of founders are looking for technical talent for their startups to help them grow. And it's especially critical in this realm that Shomit has been talking about in terms of AI and machine learning. We have students that are getting plucked out of their master's and PhD programs before they finish and getting offered very high salaries from the large tech companies. And so you got to think as a startup, you're not only competing against that, you're also competing against other startups who may have more funding, et cetera. So I would encourage all of the entrepreneurs here in the region to make sure you stay connected to other founders, because you never know. I mean, you may want to decide to have, instead of having 4 2-person companies that aren't getting any traction, we might be able to build 1 or 2, 6 to 8 person startups that actually are going to get funding and scale. And so I just want to encourage the founders who are going to see this afterwards to please make sure to connect with the community here and also with the universities, because there's a lot of talent that is not going to your startups. It's going to the big tech companies, and it's also leaving and going to other areas. And we want to keep some of that talent here in our region.
Well said, Scott. Well said. Well, it's getting close to the final minutes here. Shomit, any additional?
Can I put in one last question, maybe? Is Bridget there? Hi. Yeah. So sorry, I'm on the road, so I was trying to, but yeah, I think the connection was bad. So I had a quick comment for Shomit. So I come from data privacy security background, and I was kind of wondering what are your thoughts about the privacy implications of this data collection and for startups. How should they think about it? Because with the GDPR, CCP, and all these regulations coming through, that is a concern that you have to be cognizant of, and that can complicate matters when you are, say, going after data sets and collecting a lot of different signals and sources of data. So if you have any comments or thoughts on that, to share.
Yeah, Bridget, that's a great question. And this is why the 3rd session of these webinars will be expressly on that topic. That's because there's a very slippery slope here with data, and you need to use it in the right and ethical way. And it's really easy to do the wrong thing, both intentionally and by accident. But it's really easy to do the wrong thing and place your business at risk. So there is no single all-encompassing answer on that. But just as we talked about how you need to have this philosophy of flexibility of always looking out for additional data sources, et cetera, by the same token, you always need to be looking to see, what am I doing that could be wrong? What am I doing that could be intruding on someone's privacy? And it's really difficult to figure these things out a priori. Some of these things you might not figure out until you've started to do it, in which case you need to undo that bit of it. So this is a really good question. We'll talk about this at the next session, which is about a month from now. But it's an important consideration. And as I mentioned when I was previewing that next webinar, it's the #1 differentiator for your startup is to have an ethical data strategy beneath it.
Thank you. I was thinking that you may cover it in the next one, but I thought I'll put it out there. And actually,
Yeah.
that does give you an idea of that could actually be a whole new business for people who are specializing in this, to make sure that the data that you're collecting is sanitized and it's taken care of. I mean, the privacy implications or maybe so that could be a business model in itself as a data provider, or as say a value-added broker for data.
Right, or
Anyway,
even just, even providing balanced data, so you can provide equity through the training models. Otherwise, if your data is skewed, you end up with unethical results. How can we ensure that the data is balanced so that we don't do that? And maybe that's where your company steps in to help provide that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll join in the next one.
Super. Well, let's draw this session to a close. Thanks again very, very much. I look forward to hearing segment 3, and I have a suspicion that segments 4, 5, and 6 won't be far behind. Well, thank you very much again on behalf of UCROTP and our participants.
Thanks, everybody. Great to be here.
Thanks. Bye.